Insidious, The Last Key, the fourth movie in the Insidious franchise. I got to see a sneak preview of the movie tonight at my local theater here in Tampa. I got invited out there, and I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on the film without going into any major spoilers. So don't worry about spoilers. I will not hit you with them, just giving you my thoughts as far as whether or not you should see this movie. Now, the film stars Lin Shaye, Leigh Whannell, Josh Stewart, Caitlin Gerard, and Angus Sampson, and it is the fourth movie in the series, but it's the second one chronologically. It takes place after Insidious Chapter 3, but before Chapter 1. Now, this film franchise, even though James Wan directed the first two, it's Leigh Whannell's baby. Leigh Whannell wrote all four of the Insidious movies, and he comes back in this movie to reprise his role as Specs, but he's not the director. In this movie, Adam Robitel steps in to direct the movie. Adam Robitel directed The Taking of Deborah Logan, and he co-wrote Paranormal Activity Ghost Dimension. This is his first time taking over like a big franchise, and I feel like he did follow in the footsteps of James Wan and Leigh Whannell. I don't think he's as talented as James Wan just yet, but his career's just starting, so we'll see where it goes from here. Now, one thing that this movie, without question, totally solidifies is that the series is going in a different direction. When Insidious first started, Chapter 1 and 2 were all about the Lambert family and their problems with their hauntings and whatnot. Patrick Wilson's character, Rose Byrne, Dalton, Renee, and Josh. That's the main characters of the first two Insidious movies, and Lin Shaye was the psychic that helped them out, but she really wasn't the main character. She was more of a side character that would help out. Starting with Chapter 3, and really with this movie, the entire franchise of Insidious is shifting more towards it being the story of Lin Shaye and Specs and Tucker's adventures into the paranormal. That's where this one kind of fits in. The first two were about the family. 3 was a prequel to 1 and showed how they kind of came together. This one takes place after 3, but before 1. So it's like another adventure, but the difference between this one and the other films is that this movie is about Lin Shaye's character, Elise Rainer. This movie is entirely about her, from her being a little girl to a teenager to, of course, a grown woman being this paranormal, warrior, because she actually fights these damn demons in the movie and in other movies as well. So with that being said, the future of this franchise could continue making movies just about Elise, Tucker, and Specs. They could all be about these characters and their different battles with the different, demonic entities that they encounter in the different movies. And of course, with The Last Key, there is a brand new villain in this film, a brand new demon they have to face who has been haunting Elise's entire life since she was a very, very small girl. So even though the film takes place in between 3 and 1, there are flashbacks that go way before that, telling the story of Elise's first encounter with these entities and her development of her powers and really what drove her into becoming this, I guess you can say, like I said, demonic warrior, psychic that's actually helping people. The theme of the movie is basically Elise wants to help people no matter how scary things are, no matter how bad her past was and how freaked out she was at the things that she went through. Without going into any spoilers, she still feels that helping people is the right thing to do and that she was given her powers for that reason. Now, another thing this movie really did, like I said, it's the story of Elise Rainer, is that it expounded upon the world, not just the paranormal world within this universe, but also her family. And in fact, there are several interesting moments in the movie that I thought were kind of teases for things to come in the future. For example, they never said that Elise is the only psychic in her family. So they could make more movies on other family members, which I'm not going to spoil for you guys, that could keep this franchise going forever, to be honest. Now, the movie's produced by Blumhouse Productions, which does a lot of great horror movies. They're like the top horror film, I guess, production company nowadays. So the movie looks great. It definitely feels like Insidious, but you're probably wondering, should I see this movie? Well, first of all, this movie feels like it's made for people who are already fans of this franchise. Now, with Insidious Chapter 3, I felt there were too many moments that were very derivative. For example, the scene where Elise runs into Crane in the further and she pushes him, that was completely unnecessary and done as kind of an homage to Insidious 2. It wasn't even needed. It was almost like they kept making references to the other movies movies over and over and over again. With this movie, there is a little bit of that. Don't get me wrong. There's tons of little references to Insidious Part 1 and Part 3, but the movie allows the story to kind of tell itself. Leigh Whannell's script and the direction really puts focus on Elise's character and her family. And there's actually a part halfway through the movie where they sort of eliminate what you think is going to be a key character in this, and it really becomes about just Elise and her family and their struggles with this entity that has been screwing around with her since she was a little girl. And as the movie unravels, you start to find out more things. You start to find out what these demonic entities can actually do to people, and it really does open up the world and really open up the lore, because now there are more demonic entities, and like I said, this movie introduces a brand new one known as Keyface, who is extremely freaking creepy, has a lot of creepy moments, but ultimately, in my opinion, he went out like a punk. At the end of the movie, when they actually defeat this thing, I didn't like the way they did that. I thought it was very predictable. I thought it was too, like, lame, and I thought that he kind of went down like a punk. They kind of built him up as being the toughest demon they've ever faced because of what he can do to humans, but at the end of the day, he loses in a very less than spectacular fashion. That is one criticism of this movie. Also, one thing that did bug me about the movie, though, is that it's a little bit too convenient. Things happen to where it's almost like they're meant to happen. For example, there's a scene in the film where Elise, Tucker, and Specs go out to a random diner in the town that she lives in, and they happen to run into a couple of new characters that tie into Elise's past. They just happen to be there, and they just happen to talk, and then somebody else just happens to appear. Like, that kind of stuff took me out of the movie because I felt it was just too perfect. And there's other parts too, which I'm not going to get into because it involves spoilers, but like, you know, one of the characters who's actually in the middle of this whole haunting thing has somewhat of a twist in the middle of the movie, and it just felt like it was too perfect for him to be there and to actually catch them doing what he did. If you saw the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And that, to me, I thought was a little bit kind of lame. Now, that being said, if you're wondering whether or not you should see this movie, which again, I keep going back to this because that's what this whole review's about, it really depends on why you watch these films. If you're looking to have a truly, like, terrifying experience, like, you know, a real kind of scary horror movie you can take your girlfriend to or your boyfriend or whoever, this is not as good as the first two films whatsoever. I would say Insidious 1 is probably the best as far as scream factor and scare factor goes, because James Wan is a master. This one feels more like the third movie in that it is more story-based. Like, what keeps me invested in this movie is the story of Elise. And this whole movie is essentially the story of Elise and her family. It's all about the Rainer family. There's several members of the Rainer family, and it's really about her, her brother, her parents, and just this whole problem they ran into, which would end up leading her into being a paranormal warrior or whatever for the rest of her life. So if you care about the character of Elise Rainer and you want to know more about her backstory, you know, this movie, I think, did a great job. And the thing with a lot of these horror origin stories, like the Exorcist one, for example, they're not that great. You know, they really aren't. But I think this movie was a lot of fun, but it's not anywhere close to being as freaky as the previous ones. The villain, I thought, was a little bit of a letdown, even though he was built up pretty good. And there's not really a big backstory on this villain, unlike, for example, Crane in Insidious 2, who had the whole movie was a backstory about him. This one is really, he's just there because of circumstances of where the Rainer house happens to be built. You know, like that whole Indian burial ground thing, the house is built next to a prison where people die on the electric chair, and that ends up leading to kind of where this demon kind of manifested from, you know, if that makes sense. But I think if you're a fan of Insidious, if you're a fan of Elise and the Further and the portals and the alternate universes, I think you'll find stuff to like about this movie. Again, it's nowhere close to being as good as Part 1. I think Part 2 is my personal favorite of the 4 movies. This one is probably along the same length as 3, so if you didn't like 3, you might not like this one too much, but I can tell you that it's definitely a much more personal story. And again, if you're a fan of Lin Shaye and her character, or of Specs and Tucker, you know, you will like the movie. You'll like some things about it, but don't expect it to be the scariest film ever, because there are a couple of jump scares here and there. Early in the film, they get you, but as the film progresses, it really does focus more on story than trying to freak you out. In fact, it just really becomes more of a narrative of How are they going to fight this thing? What are they going to do? What's the next step? And to me, it's more of a thriller, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing and a good direction to take this franchise. They don't all have to be super scary, but I feel like some of the audience members who might be expecting this to be like that might be let down. I think it's a strong movie. It's not as good as Annabelle Creation in my opinion, but this is Adam Robitel's second directing job, and it's pretty good. I mean, he picked up on the franchise well. Leigh Whannell wrote the story good, and the way the film is sort of, you know, the way that things happen in the movie, they could make more of these. They could tell more stories of Elise, Specs, and Tucker, either before, in between 3 and 4, or after 2, if she's going to be a ghost, or whatever is going to happen. They could keep this franchise going forever as long as people like these movies. So tell me, did you see Insidious 4 yet? The Last Key? If you did, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. If you did not see it, go see the movie. Come back to the video and leave your comments. I avoided spoilers on purpose because I don't want to spoil the movie for you guys. There are some pretty decent twists here and some interesting, like I said, expansion of the lore. You learn a lot more about what these demons can do. And even though the ending is a little bit predictable as far as what happens, because they give you a teaser of it at the very beginning of the movie, it was still a decent film. A little bit too much like Chapter 3 in some elements, but it wasn't as derivative, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I really did have a good time watching it. Not the best horror film ever made, but definitely not an embarrassing entry into the Insidious world. So let me know what you think. Thank you. Hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to y'all down the road.